right, if you have a question, I will come around and give you the microphone.
I actually have two questions.
All right.
The first, in your research, did you come across any reference of Einstein's relationship or awareness of Albert Schweitzer?
Yes, and it's in the book. And I kind of hate giving the talk because I feel like I'm criminally cutting so many things out that are so amazing and important. And actually, the last version I gave didn't even have Spinoza in it, which I was like, this is unbelievable, but there's only so much time. So, yeah, he's a huge admirer of Schweitzer, as you probably know. And there's actually, I put in the book that, he says Schweitzer's second only to Gandhi. Gandhi is kind of the ultimate role model of peace and pacifism and oneness. But the next best, the runner-up is Albert Schweitzer, and he's in the book, yeah.
Yeah, interesting, because, as toward the end of Schweitzer's career, he moved toward religion as reverence for all of life.
Exactly, yeah, and that's in the book, and I use it mostly to trace why did Einstein become a vegetarian later in life, and why did he write these things in support of vegetarianism, which are quoted. I'm a vegan most of the time, so these are quoted in my circle. This is quoted all the time. Einstein even was on our team, and Schweitzer and Gandhi as well trace that idea of this nonviolence to all living creatures back to Jainism in Western India, which is where actually Gujarat, where Gandhi was from. So that's where I bring it into the book.
Yes, thank you. The last question was, given Einstein's theories, did he venture any thoughts on what lies beyond death?
Yeah, there is actually the very first part of the first chapter is about when Einstein dies, and he says, I say he doesn't believe in an afterlife, and he said, I think I'm paraphrasing him, but he says, people who believe in an afterlife, that's for, that's out of fear or it's out of ridiculous egotism that you think you're going to survive death as an individual. But I think, I don't think he ever gave a really clear account of what he did think happened. But again, towards the end of the book, I talk a lot about this idea of Spinoza's idea of the third kind of experience or knowledge of, your eternity. And there's quotes from Einstein where he says, "My eternity is now. That's enough for me." It's like you're seeing the eternal through the present, through the lens of this, being that mean between microcosm and macrocosm. So I think that's probably the best short answer I can give you.
Yeah. Or merging into the oneness in some way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You can hear my voice from here. Thank you. Can I just jump in?
Yeah, you're a projector for sure.
Thank you. I was, not surprised, but with the quotes, you didn't include any dates there. They're probably in the book.
They are, yeah, and I again try to keep the talk a bit streamlined.
Because I'm just wondering if Einstein's ideas have changed over time. And so when you open up that first slide, it almost seemed to me that we've already, do you believe in God? That was the question I kind of waffled on that. But then several slides later, I think it was, you quoted Einstein who said the universe is God.
That was Spinoza, a quote from Spinoza, yeah.
Okay, so Einstein never stated that there is some sort of God and deity.
I think not in the way I think you're saying it, in terms of a separate creator. And again, there's a big chapter actually basically on deism in the book, because that's kind of become the dominant interpretation with Walter Isaacson's biography, which has sold 1 million copies or whatever. And he wrote a big article in Time saying Einstein was the person of the century. And there's this idea that he's a deist, which I don't think there's any evidence for that at all, actually. So I do dive into that quite a bit of, what is his, he obviously meant it metaphorically in some sense, but is it a deist sense? Is it kind of a Christian sense, kind of a Jewish sense, or is it something else? And I think the closest, there's other quotes in the book, of course, there's much more where he says, the best way to basically define it is pantheistic, as Spinoza. But again, that quote says, I don't know if I can define myself as a pantheist, because the problem is just too vast for our limited minds.
So I'm really impressed that I'm thinking about the men and women who go to medical school. That's what they do. They don't write books on weekends. Right? Yeah. So that's really impressive. But also I'm thinking in your field, do you ever think, or do you believe in God? The same question Einstein was asking. Do you believe in God?
I think I would say I believe in Spinoza's God, who I meet every day. I also, I feel, I'll share with you that this book's kind of a Trojan horse in a sense, because I already kind of believed all this stuff personally, and it was just like almost like a happy coincidence that Einstein's views aligned, I'd say 95% with how I view the world and view spirituality. And I don't know if you've read the book, but I have a long past with Buddhism. I was living in a monastery when I was 21 years old, went to India and Nepal for a long time, and so I was very, very interested in this path, but was not raised in a kind of monotheistic tradition at all. But I think more and more I come closer to that view that there's something present everywhere. And I think there's a lot of dilemmas that raises, because there's a lot of awful, evil things in the world that are obviously not good. And there's a quote in the book actually from Schopenhauer where he says, pantheism is ridiculous because it's necessarily optimism. If you think everything's divine or everything's God, then you have to be an optimist, and then you're stuck with the fact that the world is obviously full of problems. And I don't actually agree with that interpretation, and I bring it up in the book, where I didn't have time here, but I talk about Taoism a fair bit in the book, and they have this idea of, Tao is essentially their divine or their godlike principle, and it's not all good. The Tao is all powerful, but it's not all good from a human perspective, and there's light and dark, and the fundamental symbol of Taoism is the white and the black, and they're supposed to be kind of moving. It suggests motion, and there's a seed of each in the other one. So the good force, the light forces have the dark seed, and the dark force has the seed of the light within it, and that's constantly changing and converting into each other. So I think that's probably the shortest answer I can give you is something like what I think a Taoist is. So
Thank you so much. This was an incredible experience.
thank you so much.
I also thought your presentation was wonderful, thank you. Intellectually, I learned a lot of things about Einstein I didn't know. But heartwarming, because for several years I walked past Einstein's house when I was a student, and even though he had died a couple decades before, the house seemed to glow, just seemed to glow with power of intellect. But the question I have for you is, Einstein is reputed to have said that religion without science is blind, and science without religion is lame.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what your take is on that.
Yeah, that is a real quote. I do have it in the book and the sources in there. I can't remember what it is now. But I think it's part of the bigger thing I was trying to convey here, which didn't have time to talk about everything, obviously, which is that I think he means it in a pretty specific way, which is there's this religion for him is that yearning for truth or for oneness or to understand reality, that awe and wonder at the mystery of existence. That's his idea kind of what religion is. And some sense that there's some oneness or some unity underlying all things is kind of the closest he comes, I think, to a real metaphysics or a real sense of God. And so in that sense, he's saying that without that, science is nothing. And there's actually a lot about this in the book where, he said, without that spirit of sort of yearning for unity or trying to understand and relate everything to everything else, it's just collecting data. It's just stamp collecting. You're just putting a bunch of examples and you're just doing empirical collection of data, but there's no unified understanding of what it means. And for him, there's kind of two kinds of science. There's that empirical, step-by-step, collecting data, collecting observation science, which is all I can claim to do. And then there's what Einstein would consider like the real science, the real deep science is theoretical physics, essentially. It's unifying everything through master equations and new concepts of how everything's connected to everything else.
I wanted to say I majored in English and minored in theater, so I was not a science or math major, but I did take an astronomy course that I just thought was fantastic. I don't know if that's what that
Someone's
is.
phone or something is.
Sure.
It always happens.
Do you want me to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I can
But I was going to say, growing up, I grew up Baptist, but I got into reading about Buddhism and started doing meditation, and it was very hard with the Western culture to get into that mindset of meditation and getting into studying Buddhism, which I wondered how long you were over in India. How long did you stay?
Yeah, I was just talking to someone earlier about, I was living in a Zen Buddhist monastery when I was still in college. And then after I finished college, it looks funny in retrospect because I've been in graduate school and medical residency training for the last 16 years. But at the time, I couldn't imagine doing any more school after college. And I spent about 2 years in India and Nepal
Okay.
over a bunch of different trips.
What was your field in the medical? I didn't catch what.
I'm in psychiatry now.
Okay.
So and I actually, it seems kind of quaint almost. This is only about 20 years ago I went over there for the first time over to Asia. And I mean, everyone's using apps now, and there's so many monitors. Like this was not the case even 20 years ago. I felt like I had to go to India or Nepal to find a real teacher, and I mean, it's so different now.
You were
even a
very
couple days
lucky to
later.
be able to do that.
Yeah.
And I guess
Can we
the one
pause
thing
for
that,
just a moment, please, and ask everybody to check their phones? You got it. Okay, thank you.
the other thing I wanted to say is that I was fascinated with Einstein. I know, of course, about his work and all, but the one thing that fascinated me being a gardener and having a Japanese garden is reading about the mathematical stance that he took about every flower as a mathematical sequence, and that every flower has that in nature and science. I don't know if you, but that's from my understanding of it, is that every flower, all the petals, there is a mathematical, what would you call it?
Yeah, there's like golden ratio. I think
Yeah,
it's
the
like,
ratio, yeah, which
Yeah.
I think is just amazing in nature. And I love nature and the stars, and I do feel that's where my spirituality is. I would say a lot of kindred spirit with how his beliefs and all. And that's very rare in this area, which is good to see such a good turnout of people here to listen to this lecture.
Math worshippers.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
to think that it is changing, there are more people getting into meditation, and there's all kind of apps and all kind of guided meditations, but it's not like being with a teacher, spending time.
Yeah, and I think there's, again, I didn't get into a lot of detail here, but not just Einstein, all these other thinkers, Bertrand Russell, all of them were kind of amazed. And there's a great paper written by one of these guys called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences, I think is the title, where he's saying this doesn't make any sense because the math is so effective, these really simple, E equals MC squared, just a few terms. There's only 3 terms in the equation, and that explains a huge amount. And Newton's equations are equally simple, and they can explain huge part of the cosmos, and it's not just on Earth, it's all over the entire universe. And the human mind can grasp these and come up with these. And again, it's something I spent a lot of time on in the book, is that either what the Pythagoreans are saying is true, is that the universe is ultimately math and God is ultimately a kind of a mathematician or a geometer, or there's some really strange coincidence going on, and how our human minds are able to understand that and relate to that when we should just be animals down here, looking for food and mates and all these things.
And I don't know for everybody else, but that doesn't bother me that you take that viewpoint and that belief. But
If you feel comfortable, would you comment on mindfulness?
Yeah, is there a more specific, is there more to the question, or?
Huh?
No.
Can you repeat his question?
He was asking me to comment on mindfulness, which is why I asked, is there a more specific version of the question? But I guess that's kind of how most people think of meditation today, although there's obviously hundreds, thousands of different types of meditation, but that's kind of the dominant model today, and that's what we use in a lot of clinical practice and studies where they say meditation helps this X or Y. It's usually some kind of mindfulness practice. I guess I'll just tie it in with something personal that's relevant to all this, is that I would say mindfulness was a huge part of writing this book. So a lot of the ideas for this book, which I describe a little bit in the intro to the book, there's a little preface of how I wrote it and why. Were hiking, when I was not in med school, I was down in Stanford in the South Bay, and there's a lot of nature preserves. It's actually quite beautiful down there next to Silicon Valley, the terror of that. There's all this preserved nature and all these hills and trails. And I would go there and I would actually basically be doing Zen Buddhist mindfulness practice. And I would just be walking. I wasn't trying to write the book, I'd just be walking with mindful attention. And all these kind of ideas, these pantheistic feelings are coming through when you're looking at the unbelievable beauty of nature and the complexity of it. You can see mathematical proportion, you can see all these things. Some magical, secret, invisible force is just giving all the physical laws and giving this power to life. and creating, flowers, trees, rivers, all the rocks. And so I think, and a lot of the really key ideas, and I wrote everything later, but the key ideas that made up the book, a lot of that came on these kind of mindful walks in nature. So.
Is that like the thinking experiments?
Yeah, I think what I try to say in the talk and in the book is I think that the thought experiments were almost more like hardcore spiritual journeys where you're leaving the body. And I think that that's, again, there's a lot more detail in the book where there's, even in the yoga path, there's kind of a path of love, there's a path of action and devotion, and there's an intellectual path to oneness through yoga for the kind of hardcore intellectuals and people who can't stop thinking. And I compare that to Einstein's path where, if you go far, if you use the mind far enough in any direction almost, it seems that you can kind of arrive at the same thing through deep meditation or through deep rational thinking. And one way or the other, you kind of leave the ordinary experience and the ordinary concepts behind. So.
I have a question to kind of follow up.
So when I get
great.
Oh, wait, someone has the mic.
Excuse me.
That's all right. I've not read the book. I've ordered it if I get any extra credit. I've spent about the last decade really studying what wholeness is, especially on the Christian path, but also from the perspective of other Eastern thoughts. And you don't do that without bumping into Einstein.
Yeah.
So when I saw the topic of your message, I'm like, okay, it's time to do a little more than bump into. So I appreciate the lecture, and I'm looking forward to the book. One of the things that I have been wrestling with and writing about is the distinction between time and eternity, and how we as humans move in both of those spaces as image bearers of God, and to use that specific language. So kind of a twofold question. From your experience and your embodying Einstein in that space, you use the word infinity in your book. Can you talk about the distinction between infinity and eternity? And does the distinction between the concept of either infinity or eternity create a dualism with the idea of time?
Yeah. I think the translation of infinity in that quote, so the title of the book, Part of Infinity, is a quote from Einstein in one of these conversations he had with this poet and pacifist William Hermans, who had survived, I think, Battle of Verdun, one of the big meat grinders of the First World War. And he prayed to God. He said, if you get me out of this, I will spread a message of peace and love for the rest of my life. And he did. And part of that was talking to Einstein about these ideas and getting him to sign on to his pacifist manifestos. So that's where that quote comes from. I don't know what they were talking about in German, because he spoke German as well. So it might have been something like eternity, infinity. So I don't want to focus too much on that, because I don't know what the original word was. But I think what they were getting at was this idea of eternity, or the eternal in some sense. And there's a great quote, which is in the book, from Plato, I think, where he says, time is the moving image of eternity. And I think that's, as you'll find when you read it, that's kind of the tension running through the whole book, is how to understand that without resorting to dualism. And to say, clearly there is some kind of multiplicity. There's obviously difference and separation, and we all feel like separate individuals. So you can't just deny all that without doing a lot more and doing some heavy work to try to, if you really want to say it's all one and the differences are all sort of illusory or imaginary or not the fundamental truth. So I think there's no short answer to that, but it's a huge part of the book, is trying to reconcile that and trying to insist. I think the oneness view, the eternal, that it's all eternal and united, I'm into that, and I want to sort of advocate for that. But it kind of takes a book to to sort of reconcile those two things. So, yeah. Did you?
I got to spend several decades in a very dogmatic, black and white, hyper-fundamentalist, this is how it is, I know everything, let me tell you about it. And there was no room for anything else. And happily, I got liberated from that, and some of that liberation actually happened in this room decades ago. And I got to a point now where I'm totally comfortable with basically knowing nothing. And it really works. If everything was in here, it'd be pretty crowded in there. I'm finding out it's mostly a vacuum, so that seems to leave room for new stuff. And your new stuff is wonderful. I could stay in this stuff forever. But the main source of theology in the New Testament are Paul's writings in the book of Romans. And right at the beginning of that book, he says, they are without excuse because he made himself known through the handiwork of his creation, not sermons, scriptures, or anything else, but through the creation itself. Have you, in your journey through this process, encountered anybody that's used that as a way to leap from this dogmatic, it's this way, even a dualistic way, to this pantheism kind of a thing?
Yeah, I think there's, again, the chapter on deism in the book, and it's kind of the end of the pantheism chapter about Spinoza, because I was trying to counter this Walter Isaacson view that he's basically a deist. I think that's kind of the deist view in a nutshell, which is not necessarily that the world is divine, but like, look at how amazing and complex and perfectly ordered everything is. So clearly someone created it, something or someone created it. And I actually do spend a fair bit of time trying to, again, work around that and say, yes, it does imply order and creativity and lawfulness. That's undeniable, and complexity, creativity. But you don't get a separate creator from that for free. You get some kind of wisdom or intelligence or a sort of mathematical God that's inherent in reality. But it's a non sequitur. It's not a logical step to say that the creator or the force that makes all that possible is separate. And that's exactly what I kind of focus in on the book, and I use a lot of quotes from Einstein as well to say that you can't justify the phantom-like separate creator or a separate substance or a separate spiritual world. You can point to the world and say, yeah, look at the handiwork. There's more going on here than random atoms colliding together. There's more than just nothingness or chaos. There's clearly order. There's clearly proportionality. There's clearly creativity. But how you interpret that and how you see that is that's kind of where the devil's in the details there. So, yeah.
Quick unrelated question. Is the dream work that you were referring to between Einstein and Pauli, is that what they would call lucid dreaming?
I think it's quite analogous. I don't have a lot of personal experience with like Jungian therapy and active imagination, as he called it, but I think a lot of the techniques he uses, it's basically what it is, or even almost like hypnagogic imagery. So it would be usually what Jung described, he's doing it in the evening time, kind of towards after dinner, and he's kind of has this private time in the evenings away from the kids and the wife, and he's kind of having these active imagination experiences. So, and Jung actually describes entering into those states using very, very old spiritual techniques of kind of imagining a descent. Hypnotherapists still use these techniques now. So I think it is very much like a lucid dream state. Yeah.
Kieran, thank you. Thank you for your this closer.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you for your book, and thank you for your presentation.
Well, thank you for that.
I felt inspired and enriched by both. Many of us are concerned now about what some have described as our dark night of the soul as a species. And when I read your book and books like yours, I'm encouraged by the evolution of consciousness. I no longer worry about the evolution of the cosmos. It's going to keep going. Been there a long time. But I do get concerned sometimes about whether or not our consciousness as a species can be, I want to say quick enough, but sufficient to deal with the problems and the choices that we are having a difficult time making these days. So, but again, when I read your book and similar books, I'm encouraged about our species and our future. And I was wondering, in your long journey with Einstein and all the people that you drew in to your good work, do you have a comment? Has it made you more hopeful about our species and our future? Has it had any effect on that? If you care, I would like to hear your response.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for the easy question. Are we doomed or are we going to be okay? I do think one thing writing this book did for me is really forced me, I mean, I read a lot of the original sources and we went back to the Pythagoreans and the Upanishads, and I think it does give you it's one thing to say like, oh, whatever, 2000 BC, something happened. And it's another thing to read what people wrote 2,000 or 4,500 years ago in the pyramid texts, and to see how long our history is. I mean, and that's still just scratching the surface, obviously. And modern humans have been around for at least 100,000 years, and probably have had religion and beliefs and language and all these things. So I think I don't know how I feel exactly at this moment, and AI in particular is scaring me. But at the same time, we've come a hell of a long way, and it's really, really easy to pick holes in our society or our country or where things are going. But when you remember that we lived in caves not that long ago, and we built all this, and there's a lot in the book actually about Einstein wringing his hands over nuclear power, because even though he didn't build the bomb, E equals MC squared was the foundation of nuclear energy, and the proof that these tiny quantities of matter, if they're unstable and you can release them, create unbelievable energy, and created weapons obviously out of that. So there's a lot of agonizing about this, that as our knowledge becomes more powerful, we just get more power. We have more power. It doesn't make us any better. It just multiplies our potential for good and evil. So I think that's kind of where we're at. I don't know if it's necessarily good or bad, but we certainly have more power than we've ever had over nature, and yet we're still kind of the same people struggling with that. So, and again, we have come a really, really long way. And even the stuff Einstein worried about, nuclear weapons have never been used again. However close we've come, however many close calls and mistakes there have been, have never been used since World War II. So that's something to celebrate, I think.
I haven't read the book, and your talk was going very quickly, and so I want to clarify something. When you were talking about the Greeks and Pythagoras and Plato, I found it unusual that Plato is treated as a monist here. I mean, I always think of Plato as the source of dualism in the world, with the introduction of the world of forms and the world of experience, and dualism is one of the most destructive forces I think we have going with us. And so I was curious about how Plato entered into this stream of talk about how things led toward pantheism and monism and so forth. And I need to read and get more info, so I'm asking an uninformed question.
Yeah.
Can you help me?
Yeah, I think the specific point I was trying to make is that the Pythagorean ideas of math as a kind of mystical path, of the divine being as a kind of geometer or a mathematician of some kind, that's the main point I was trying to make. But there is that quote from Aristotle that Plato is actually a monist. And I mean, this is a minefield, right? I mean, scholars have been writing about Plato for centuries, and I've read most of Plato now, but he's not super consistent either, right? There's a lot of different ideas, and it's all written as dialogue, so it's never presented as, I'm Plato and here's what I believe. It's, here's these conversations. So I think Plato's almost like the Bible, where you can find whatever you want, and then you can interpret it however you want. There's so much in there, and there's so many characters saying things that it's really hard to know, or I'd say it's actually impossible to know what did he really believe. But we do have these accounts from people like Aristotle, and there's other ones as well, that ultimately we knew Plato personally, and what he believed was this, and this is how he compares to other philosophers. And I'd say there is evidence of that. I talk about some of this in the book, in the Republic, some of his core passages and some of the most famous dialogues, where it's less dualistic when you actually look into it. It's more almost emanationist, where there's the good or the one, and that's kind of the central. He compares it to the sun. That's one of his most famous allegories. And that everything kind of comes from that. And there's lower levels, but the sunlight is the warmth and the energy that's the source of everything. And then it gets lower and kind of more degraded and less divine as you go. But it's not quite a kind of two worlds interpretation. So.
A couple of things.
It's his descendants who have mucked up his image or his thought? Or?
Yeah, I think there's many schools. That's the thing that everyone's fighting over it. So it's not as if there's one interpretation and everyone loves fighting over Plato. So, yeah.
Just a couple of things. I don't know if anybody has listened to The People's Pharmacy on PBS. I listened to it a few weeks ago, and there was an internist on who wrote a book called The Insiders. And it was a book about the epidemic of people being in their homes and not getting outside. And he encouraged people to get out in the morning before you have coffee and when the sunlight is out, and to get out for at least 30 minutes and to be in the sunlight, and if there are people about, to relate to people, say hello. But that 30 minutes, he said, in the direct sunlight without sunglasses would reset your clock, and it would help you not only sleep better, but encourage the dopamines in your brain to be more active, and that would give you a sense of peace and a sense of harmony in the world. And he said that if you go out for 2 hours into a forest, a deep forest, that they've done research that trees are giving off sounds, and that humans cannot hear the sounds, but if you're in the forest, you can and do a meditative walk, that you will, and if you can't stay 2 hours, 1 hour, and that will reset your clock, your brain, whatever, and the dopamine or whatever, I'm not sure what, neuro whatever in your brain will give you that sense of peace and harmony, he said, for a month. And he encouraged people to, because of so many people on their phones, especially young people, I mean adults too, that inside the house, in a dark house, is just not healthy for people. So that's something to think about. My husband and I started doing that, and he said if you put your hands in the soil to plant plants, that too is very good for your soul and for your brain. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is going back to the dreams. I do believe I have very vivid dreams, and I do believe that whoever you think of as creator, God, or whatever, can come to us through dreams. And I've had that experience with the death of my mother. I've been grieving very much for her. Came to me in a dream and was walking through a field near her parents' farm, and came closer and closer, and then just hugged me in a big hug. And after that, I felt more at peace about her death. So I think dreams are a way, like I think what you're saying is Einstein felt that dreams through Jung. I've done a little bit of work studying Jung, of course, I guess everyone has, but about dreams and how vivid they can be and how they can speak to you. So that was the second thing.
Yeah.
And then the film Oppenheimer, seeing, whoever played, I don't know if you played Einstein, but seeing him talk with Oppenheimer, I think it was just a short visit, but I thought about that and enjoyed that movie very much, and how he would have felt creating, like you say, not the bomb, it was dropped, but the energy.
Yeah.
And I think that energy, we can use that. I do believe that there is a good force still with human beings, and that there is good, and that we can use energy to promote good things.
Thank you. I think there's one behind you, Jim. Oh, other behind you as well.
Time for the book. As you've unpackaged cosmic religion, do you think it's still necessary to use the word God?
Personally, I do not. I'm not a big fan of it just because I feel like there's so much cultural baggage around it. So maybe this is the wrong room to admit that. But yeah, I just feel, and I think the word itself is so, it's so anthropomorphized in its essence. And I mean, I know many people understand it differently. But I don't use it much in the book, and there is actually a section in the book on what did Einstein mean by that, and why did he use that metaphor or that phrase when there's so much kind of baggage associated with it. And I think, again, I didn't grow up that way, so I never, there was no pressure or no family kind of influence to believe in that. And I was drawn really early on to Buddhism, not so much because it's atheistic, but because it was a personal path. So it wasn't so much read this or believe this. It was kind of, hey, come meditate, come live in the monastery, or come fast with us and have your own experience, and here's how we interpret it. But I think I would say I'll give some to the other side too, which is the more deeply I get into all this, the more I appreciate that everyone was trying to use some kind of word, and that it's really, really hard when you've had experiences like this yourself, or it's impossible to really communicate them. It's impossible to even understand it yourself. And so more and more I have kind of a gentleness and a sort of sympathy with people who are trying to express it, reincarnation, God, however, Brahman, whatever you want to call it. People who are struggling and doing kind of the best they could, I think, in most cases, to express something that's inexpressible. And so again, I think maybe I'm mellowing out as a bit as I get older as well, because I was pretty fervently atheist when I was younger, and now I feel like it's more, we're brushing up against the inexplicable and the incomprehensible. And I think I love that Einstein quote, we have just enough intelligence to see that it's not enough. We can't understand reality, we can't understand God. These are questions that are beyond us. But
all right, we've got time for about 2 more questions.
I'm definitely not a physicist or a mathematician, and I'm perfectly comfortable on landing on the word mystery. But it appears, especially in Einstein, did you say the last 30 years of his life, he was striving to come up with a formula or to explain it all?
Yeah.
I mean,
Unified field
can it be explained in math? Can it be? I mean, it seems like to me like I almost feel sorry for people who can't land on the word mystery.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think he was kind of ridiculed in his time for wasting his time on this stuff, but I think pretty much every physicist now agrees with him. We can and we should be looking for a master equation, and that's basically everyone who has the ego or the ambition to do it is looking for kind of that master equation. They're not following the same paths he was following, but I think everyone's kind of on his team now that that's what we need. But again, I get into this a lot in the book actually, which is even if you had that, it doesn't include consciousness, which is kind of a big problem since we're all conscious and everyone knows from their own experience. And in fact, all our science is filtered through the conscious experience. So I think even if you get that, and most physicists are aiming for that, or think or believe or have some faith that we can get there for the entire physical universe, you're still, at best, you're kind of halfway there, where now you've got a full physical explanation for all matter and all energy, and we still don't have any idea how consciousness and subjective experience fits into that, which is more where my own research and my own interest lies. And that's kind of where Jung and Pauli were going, and why I brought that into the book and the talk, is they went further than Einstein and trying to actually integrate that. And there's actually some great quotes I didn't have space for in the talk, but where Pauli says the same thing, and Jung in their letter, some of their last letters, Jung says, we're brushing up, I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, we're brushing up on the edge of what's even conceivable. We're trying to come up with some mind-matter, non-dual understanding of reality, and Pauli says the same thing. He said, I've gone back to the Pythagoreans. People have been trying to do this for thousands of years, and taking a hint from the past, we should probably be circumspect and not expect any solutions to come up anytime soon.
Okay, I guess I'm the last question.
No pressure.
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I love coming to talks where I get inspired to think about things a different way. So now my question is, what are you working on next? And what's your next book? I'm just wondering what, walking, meditation, and nature, what's coming to you?
Well, thanks. I feel like you must have been planted in the audience. That's a question. That's a funny story I told Jim last night. My publisher, I got my agent first, Anna, and then I'd written up part of another book on neuroscience and spirituality, which is more my field and what I studied in my PhD. But then I got sidetracked by this because I was looking for other scientists who believe in spirituality or had a spiritual side, and I found all these quotes. And in my incredible naivete, I thought this will be easy and quick to write a book about Einstein spirituality, because how much can there possibly be to say? And it's probably just tracing Buddhist influence or something, and that'll be a quick, short book to start with. So then I had sort of 2 half-done books, and I gave those to my publisher or my agent, and she went to the publisher, and they said, we like what you're writing, like your style, but you're not an Einstein scholar, you're not a biographer, you're not a physicist, you're not a historian. We don't really believe he's going to be able to write a good book about this, but we want the other book, so we'll give you a double contract. So the second book is actually due in October, which I don't know how that's going to happen, because it's been in the works for a long time, but it is, it's taking the same ideas, I think, further or in a different direction, which is, I think this book, in a nutshell, it's kind of how physics and spirituality are mutually interdependent and ultimately kind of one thing, and that our greatest physicists were inspired by a spiritual worldview and almost spiritual experiences of insight into the nature of reality, and that feeds back into our science. And the other book is very much about how life and evolution and biology is the same thing. So, I'm a scientist, I'm a biologist, I'm a doctor, I do believe in evolution, and if you take that seriously, and then you also take the other stuff seriously we've been talking about the last couple hours, which I do because I've also lived that life, there's a big gap there between, we're apes and we're mammals that evolved, and our brains serve survival advantages, help us reproduce and get food, and yet our brains are clearly able to have these very transcendent experiences. They're able to understand reality to an incredible degree. And so the next book is basically trying to, I think I call it Building Bridges Between Matter and Spirit, showing the integration of science and spirituality, and really trying to reconcile the fact, I think in my mind, like the reality that we are evolved organic beings, we're made of the same stuff as everything else, and yet we also have these unbelievable spiritual capacities and experiences and ability for mysticism, and trying to really show how that comes from the bottom up.
Why are you so attracted to simplicity?
Will you promise to come back and discuss that?
Yeah, I'd be love to come back. So, yeah, and I'll just say another thank you. I mean, I wasn't actually sure how this would land here, and Jim was like, "You should come, and it's going to be great." And I was like, "Well, we'll see." I mean, this is not very unorthodox views of mine and of Einstein. So, it's been great questions and awesome to have people come out. And so, yeah, love to see you.
Thank everyone for coming. Thank you for your donations. That keeps us able to bring speakers like this. So thank you all for coming and showing up and being part of this kind of conversation. So let's give him one more hand. He came a long way.